Tarde. Boa tarde a todos. Espera aí, deixa eu só mudar aqui. Bem-vindos, mais um encontro do Tiaços. Para quem já é frequentador habitual, um grande abraço. Para quem está vindo pela primeira vez, sinta-se bem-vindo e bem-vinda. Hoje nós temos um convidado muito especial, nosso querido Renos Papadopoulos. Se vocês soubessem o quanto a vida do Renos é ocupada, quanta coisa ele tem a fazer de trabalho, aula, palestra, vocês não imaginariam que pudesse ser possível a presença dele aqui. Então, para nós, é uma satisfação imensa que o Renos tenha aberto um espaço na agenda dele para poder estar conosco, conversar com o nosso público brasileiro, prestigiar o nosso projeto Tiaços. Renos, vou fazer a tua apresentação oficial, depois a gente dá início. Renos Papadopoulos, PhD, é professor de Psicologia Analítica e diretor do Centro for Trauma, Asylum e Refugiados, membro do Human Rights Center e da Transitional Justice Network, todos ligados à Universidade de Essex. Psicólogo clínico honorário e psicoterapeuta familiar sistêmico da clínica Tavistock. Atua também como analista junguiano, com experiência didática e de supervisão, e como psicoterapeuta familiar sistêmico em consultório particular. Como consultor de muitas organizações, Renos tem trabalhado com refugiados, torturados, pessoas traficadas e outros sobreviventes de violência política e desastres em muitos países. Ele dá palestras e oferece treinamento especializado internacionalmente, e seus escritos foram publicados em 18 idiomas. Recentemente, ele recebeu o prêmio da Associação Europeia de Terapia de Família por sua excelente contribuição para o campo da terapia familiar e prática sistêmica. Da Universidade de Essex, pelo alto impacto de sua pesquisa internacional, de duas fundações mexicanas, pelo excepcional trabalho com crianças e famílias vulneráveis no México, e da Associação Internacional de Estudos Junguianos, ele recebeu o prêmio C.G. Jung 2022, pela contribuição vitalícia no campo dos estudos junguianos. Seus dois últimos livros publicados se intitulam Moral Injury e Involuntary Dislocation. Especialmente o último foi saudado como inaugurando um novo paradigma no campo. Renos, prazer enorme em te receber. Como eu havia dito, queria te agradecer novamente no meu nome, do Tiaços, por você ter aberto um espaço para estar aqui conosco. Eu sei que não é fácil, né? A gente conversou aqui um pouco antes, é muita coisa que você faz, mas a gente se sente honrado de recebê-lo pela tua presença e pelo tema que você vai trazer, um tema tão atual, tão contemporâneo, e é um tema também que cada vez mais está inscrito na história do Brasil e faz parte também da realidade brasileira. Então, muito obrigado pela sua presença, sinta-se à vontade, a palavra é sua.
Thank you, Marcus. It's a great pleasure for me. It is an honor and really a joy to accept your invitation and to have an opportunity to meet with your members, and I look forward to a fruitful exchange. I warn you, what I'm going to say is not usual stuff. So ideally, I would like to expand in order to convey to you the complexity of the framework that I want to present. On the other hand, I would like to have as much interaction with you as possible. So, there is some dilemma there, but hopefully all of us live with dilemmas. We will try to deal with these dilemmas creatively. So I want to start sharing my screen because I have prepared some slides, and my intention is to speak for as short as possible, but I don't think that I will be able to be much less than 1 hour, hopefully a bit less. But then I really would like to have an exchange with you as much as possible in terms of commenting about what you have heard from me, commenting about what you have not heard from me, also sharing some of your experiences, etc. Good. So let me start. I'm sharing now my my presentation. Can you see can you see my presentation, that it is the main one now? Yeah, okay, right. So I want to start with this gentleman. You all know who he is. His name is Antonio Guterres, and he's Portuguese, and he's now the Secretary General of the United Nations. This little clip, not more than about 2 minutes, is about 10 years ago, when he was Director General of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And he's talking about the children in Syria following the war in Syria. So it's about 10 years ago. Okay, please listen carefully to what he's going to say. And then I would like to discuss it with you and use this as the kind of leitmotif of my presentation.
Talk of the enormous risk of Syria facing the problem of a lost generation. And if there are 2 words that come to my mind, those words are trauma and anger. First of all, trauma. 75% of the children fleeing Syria have less than 11 years old. I met many of them. I've seen people with loss of speech. I've seen children with broken sleep. I've seen children with forms of behavior that were very challenging, very strange. I remember one child of 4 years old with a family in a tent in Zatri. During the 15, 20 minutes I was with them, she was compulsively shooting with a toy gun. And it was impossible for the family or for myself to make the child stop. I've seen lots of drawings of children in school, and with planes bombarding, with soldiers killing each other, with houses being destroyed, with civilians, including children, dead. This is indeed a situation in which those children are not only paying the tragic events they are living, they'll be paying it for the rest of their lives.
Okay, we heard very clearly Antonio Guterres discussing his understanding of the situation of the children in Syria. We don't have time, and we are not in the same room. If we were in the same room, I would ask each one of you to tell me your own reactions to him. And my guess is that 99% will be very positive. He's a good man. He's one of us. He cares for children. He is using psychological language, and he has a lot of compassion for the people and their plight. And obviously, he is trying to help us understand their pain. And also, he's trying to tell us about basically how much we need to help them. So that's very clear, isn't it? Well, let me analyze what he has said in a completely different way. he's saying that this is a lost generation. So he's not saying that these people are suffering now, but he's also predicting that they will be damaged. Lost generation is not just simply they will be suffering. He's saying they will be lost. So he's condemning them for the rest of their lives. He says that they're going to be damaged for the rest of their lives. I'll come back to that. The key words that he comes up with is trauma and anger. I don't know if you know, I mean, his wife happens to be a social worker, so he's one of us. He's interested in mental health, so it's really good, isn't it? But please, the war in Syria did not start because of trauma and anger. And the phenomenon of the war in Syria has nothing to do with trauma and anger. It's about geopolitical interests that international powers play in Syria. Nothing of that. He is, in other words, what is he doing? He's psychologizing a political event. And, you know, yes, he's a good guy, but, you know, we need to be careful about these things. Then he's giving us the statistics that 75% of the children are under 11 years old. Yes, so what? Is there any evidence that because they are 75, they are less than 11 years old, they will be more damaged or less damaged? If we know anything about psychology or psychotherapy, we will say it depends who their parents, where their parents is, or what other carers they have, or how they are helped to understand what has happened to them. Yes, of course, they will be suffering, but will they be damaged for the rest of their lives because they are under 11? Then he tells us that there are challenging behaviors like loss of speech and broken sleep. Please, let us be real. If you see an accident while going home and somebody was hurt, you will be shaken. If young people or anybody have their house destroyed and they are suffering from the experiences of war, it is very appropriate to have such reactions. So loss of speech and broken sleep, it's very appropriate. It would be inappropriate if it was the opposite. Imagine if children see their houses being burned, people being killed, and then they carry on as if nothing happens. Then we should be worrying. Then he's telling us that he was at the Zaatari refugee camp. I don't know how many of you know Zaatari refugee camp. It's in the desert of Jordan. And probably at that time when he was there, there must have been something like 100,000 people. And when there are 100,000 people in that place, and you know the little tents that United Nations created for these people are tiny, and there are families there. And then Mr. Guterres walks in. Did he walk in on his own? Certainly not. He must have had an entourage of I don't know how many, but 2, 3 at least 2, 3 people. He would have had security, he would have had journalists, he would have had photographers, he would have had video cameras, etc., etc. Now, please, if I come to your house and your 4-year-old child is going to come and shake my hands and say, welcome, Professor home, he's going to carry on being what he's doing. And if I want to connect with your child, I need to go down to his level, and I need to sort of, you know, play a little game and all of that to connect with him. But I'm just walking in there, and he says that he was there for 15 to 20 minutes. Now, he's a politician. Probably it was 10 or even 5, but it doesn't matter. Even if he was there for 20 minutes, he expects to establish rapport with a 4-year-old child when he barges into their private space. We forget all of these things. All of us are dazzled by the idea of trauma. And we say, yes, they're traumatized. Here, I don't see any trauma here. And of course, when, why is that compulsive behavior that he was carrying on? He's just carrying on with his own activities to counteract the intrusion that he felt by Guterres going into his space, into his private space. Very, very ordinary things, very ordinary things. But you see, once you start using, trauma and war and all of that, we forget ordinary things. That's my first point. That's my first point. We get dazzled by this enormity of these painful situations, and we forget ordinary things, ordinary ways of human behavior. So I see no compulsive behavior in a 4-year-old child carrying on being himself in order to counteract the intrusion into his private space. Now, about the drawings of planes bombarding and houses destroyed and dead people and all of that. First of all, where did those children get the paper and pencils? Did they go to a supermarket? They were given to that by United Nations, by all these workers, very good, very idealistic young workers who want to help people with their trauma. And they ask them to draw planes and houses destroyed. So, okay, I am cynical now. In order to take photographs, in order to get more funding for their projects. But if they were going to ask them, draw me flowers, the children would draw flowers. And he's saying that they're going to be paying for the rest of their lives. So he's actually condemning these people that he's trying to help. Can you follow this dynamic? Do we need to condemn people in order to help them? Do we need to pathologize the people in order to help them? Can we not help them because they need to be helped and keeping their human dignity? Do we need to say that they pity them, they're traumatized, please help them? These are very serious questions that, of course, please, I mean, I'm using Antonio Guterres because it's a very neat 2-minute excerpt. But my argument is that all of us, he's not the body and we're the goodies. All of us tend to see things in this way. Certainly our societies try to present these situations from this perspective. And it's important for us to have the clarity and depth of understanding in order to pause and ask questions about the traditional ways that we look at these situations. And this is what I will do with you today. Try to pause and say, let's rethink most of these key issues that usually lead us without thinking into using this type of language that Guterres is using. In other words, the predominant discourses in this sort of situation is that in order to help survivors, first we need to pathologize them. There is a vulnerabilization of what we would say of our discourses. In other words, the more vulnerable you are, the more demonstratively vulnerable you are, the more benefits you get. It pays you to become vulnerable. And in order to help you, I'd say how damaged you are. These are very dangerous dynamics, very dangerous dynamics. Please, there are a lot of people in the social sciences that warn us against these situations, starting from Hannah Arendt, who was talking about the politics of pity. Politics of pity. Look at our newspapers. But please, it's not just only the newspapers, it's us, the professionals. We present people who are completely broken, usually women, you know, who are crying, and they, you know, pity them. Politics of pity, spectacle of suffering, distant suffering, mediation of suffering. We need to be very careful. Human beings are human beings. We need to treat them with dignity. And this parading of their suffering around in order to solicit sympathy, for me, is unacceptable. And it's actually very, very dangerous. Also, what we do, we tend to privilege the psychological and psychiatric dimensions, ignoring and minimizing all other human dimensions. For example, educational, financial, spiritual, political, moral, their Weltanschauung, the way that they understand their reality, and all of these sort of things. So let's go back to Jung. Jung had amazing insights. I picked this up, which is very clear. He's telling us that the more you advance in the understanding of the psyche, the more careful you will have to be with terminology, because it is historically coined and prejudiced. In other words, it is affected by the wider contingencies of society, as we have shown of Guterres. Now, I'm afraid those of you who have come later, you will not be able to understand what I'm talking about, but presumably when this will be made available to you later, you will have the whole presentation. The more you penetrate the basic problems of psychology, the more you approach ideas which are philosophically, religiously, and morally prejudiced. Therefore, certain things should be handled with utmost care. Jung is saying to us, watch it. Don't just simply quickly run into trauma, anger, I don't know, projections, identifications, and all of that. He's saying there are moral issues, there are religious issues, there are philosophical issues. And also, but also, he is talking about the psyche. So he's still locked into his own situation. And he's talking, problems of psychology. So although he is telling us that actually there are other relevant dimensions, philosophical, religious, moral, etc., and in other writings he talks about social as well. Nevertheless, he talks, or you must say to me, of course he's a psychologist, but then he can tell us that actually I am not looking at these phenomena in their reality. I'm looking at these phenomena exclusively from my psychological perspective. So what we have seen here is that people, he tends to victimize those people he wants to help. And I want us to make a very important differentiation, a differentiation that does not exist anywhere in the literature. And usually we say, quite correctly, in all languages, that these children are victims of war, or people can be victims of earthquakes, or victims of tsunamis, or victims of climate change, etc. In other words, victims of different types of adversity and different types of devastating events and circumstances. So that's an objective reality. A person has been victimized by these adversities, or these events, or these circumstances. That's a fact. But inevitably, once we be looking at them in terms of being victims, then they develop a victim identity. And we need to make a distinction between people of victims of adversity and people developing a victim identity, because a victim identity is something that we co-construct with them in terms of our interaction. In the way that Guterres interacts with the Syrian children, he is saying that they are victims. And when a person develops a victim identity, I mean, it's a whole chapter, it's a whole, we don't have time to go into that, but you can understand what are the characteristics of a victim identity: passivity, lack of responsibility, inappropriate dependence and entitlement. I'm a victim, you need to help me. It disempowers a person. And in English, we have the expression, they learn to become helpless. We teach them to become helpless. Learned helplessness. And also, we need to recognize that there is a secondary victimization where these people are victims of war. And what I'm arguing, my friends, is that Guterres, unwittingly, he doesn't intend to, he intends the opposite. In effect, he victimizes them further. Inadvertently, he's installing and strengthening the victim identity, pathologizing those he wants to help. And he's saying that actually they will be victims for the rest of their lives. Not just simply now. He's condemning them. You'll be damaged. You're finished. Is he the one who's going to help them? If you install, please, I've been working for many years in 40 different countries, from wars to famines to earthquakes to all sorts of things. If you install victim identity, it's much more difficult to get that out rather than helping people with their original suffering from the war. That sticks. That you cannot change easily. That's more dangerous. So the secondary victimization, which we, you and I, the good people, install in these people, is much worse than what they originally suffered. I want you to challenge me on that, and I can give you myriads of examples. And again, we need to go back to Jung. And I've done quite a bit of work, and I've written quite a lot about Jung and the other. In fact, I'm the first one who started talking about Jung and the other 40 years ago, before that. Anyway, we know that any of my characteristics that threaten me, I other them. I say they do not belong to me, but to another. This is classic. No, every beginner student of psychodynamic therapy knows that, or theory. And actually, I'm a little bit concerned because the Jungians have accepted the Jungian terminology of shadow, but actually has nothing to do with it. Shadow is not part of me. Shadow, it doesn't hurt. It's a chemo, I cannot catch it. And we all accept, oh, the difficult parts of us is shadow. No, the difficult parts of you, my friend, hurts you. A shadow doesn't hurt. And a shadow is not always there. So I question the whole idea of the shadow, which is another form of othering that apparently is trying to help us understand the difficulties within us, but it actually doesn't. The shadow is not like, when you are feeling like vomiting because you cannot bear certain things, either of yourself or of others. In a paper that is used very widely and is translated in many languages, that I talked about two different types of, I differentiated between the distant and exotic other and the familiar and close other. Let me explain to you what I meant by that. What I'm saying is that usually when we look at others, the obvious other is the very different from me. And there are two opposite ways of dealing with that. One is to demonize them with abhorrence and rejection. I fear them. But the other is to idealize them. This is what Jung has been doing. He has been idealizing the so-called primitives. And for centuries, and for so many years, all Jungians were following that, which is classic noble savage syndrome. You are savages, but well, you are noble savages, and I adore you, but you are savages. That's what Jung has been doing. We need to stand up to that. I've been talking about that for years. The idealization of the other, of the distant other, of the exotic other. That's what Jung was doing. All the East and all of that, etc. You know, the Mexican Indians and all of that. By the way, I don't know. I don't know if you know the story. I mean, I was there in Pueblo Indians and all of. Jung visited them for less than 2 hours, and then he wrote that he knew, and he, you know. Anyway, that's another story. But please, I'm not against you. I'm not against you. I'm really not against you. But we need to put things, you know, in realistic context. Next to the distant and exotic other, there is the close and familiar other, which we consider them as tried and unimportant, and usually I ignore them. That is close to the Freudian narcissism of minimal differences, if you know that expression. But that is something that is much closer to me, and it disturbs me, but I do not even notice it. And I'm adoring or I'm attacking the exotic other. But there is another other that is closer to me. It's my family. It's aspects of myself. Those I don't see as other, but I keep othering them all the time. Now, according to this current situation with this humanitarian industry and all of that, I am adding now another other, a third other, and that is the vulnerable and pitiful other. The others that we say that all these traumatized people that we need to save. And we are the saviors. We are the fantastic people. We have the theory. We understand everything. We are going to save everybody. And all of these traumatized people, that's exactly what Guterres was doing. That's exactly what Guterres was doing. And that is a variation of the noble savage, but in reverse. And it activates the savior archetype. And we love to be saviors, of course. We love. And, you know, I don't want to spend much time, you know, we don't have very much time. I just want to remind you that there is also the archetypal complexities of the victim, you know, from the victim triangle, you know, the perpetrator, rescuer, and victim. These are very, very embedded in the way that we understand the way that we help others. And we need to be very, 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 very careful. Okay, let me move on. I'm changing a chapter. The Interagency Standing Committee of the Mental Health and Psychosocial Support, as well as the International Red Cross and International Red Crescent, in other words, the main humanitarian organizations, have developed a pyramid, both of them. You see, this is the pyramid of the one and this is of the other. In order to remind us of what? That the majority of people in any situation of collective adversity, the majority of people are not psychologically damaged. They are not psychologically disturbed. They are shaken. And here it is. Can we make these differentiations between people being shaken, suffering, being psychologically or psychiatrically disturbed or disordered? Everything that is mental health is just one thing? I thought we're supposed to be proper scientists and know the complexities of mental health, and we don't just shove everybody in the same category. But these humanitarian organizations for years, since 1990, have been have been basing their work on this clarity that the overwhelming majority of people are not psychologically disturbed. They're psychologically shaken, yes. And therefore, what they need is basic psychosocial support. In other words, give them some social activities, connect them with their families, give them some creative activities, dance, movement, songs, drawings, etc., etc., etc. Connect them with established social cohesion and all of that. Then as you go along, fewer and fewer people require more psychologically sophisticated specialist help. So the trauma that Guterres was talking about is about the top of the pyramid. The majority of people do not require trauma treatment. They require basic psychosocial support, focused psychosocial support, psychological support, and specialist mental health care, which is specialist psychological and psychiatric, is for the very few. I don't want to waste time, but research shows that people who actually have psychiatric disorders as a result of these situations, 88% of them already had psychiatric disorders before. So these situations do not create psychiatric disorders. We are all bombarded by images of destruction and human suffering all the time, everywhere. And then, of course, we follow the societal discourse of Guterres, who says that these people are traumatized. And I'm asking you, if you were here, this is actually in Zurich, in Central Station. When these people arrive, if you were to speak with these people, you will get a wide variety of responses. For example, this woman here would be so, I don't know, I wasn't there to tell you exactly, but I mean, I can tell you from experience. One person would be completely devastated that they lost so many members of their families. All of them will be relieved that they finally made it into a safe space. Some of them with a lot of pain because they lost other loved ones along the way, but now they are with, they managed finally they achieved their goal to bring their child, or at least one of their child, into a new place. So it's not just they're damaged or not damaged. They're human beings. They have a whole variety of different feelings. Some relief, some regret, some pain, some anger, some gratitude, a whole lot of things. Why do we need to pathologize them and say simply that they are traumatized? Why? Where is that coming from? Let us examine what I call severe forms of collective adversity. Severe forms of collective adversity. Usually people say trauma situations, but trauma situations is a tautology, as you know. A trauma situation is a situation that creates a trauma, and a trauma is what's created by trauma situation. I mean, are we so primitive? Yes, we are. Yes, we are. All our Western discourse is based on this simple and inappropriate epistemological errors of this tautological. That's why I'm saying these are severe forms of collective adversity. Don't call the events trauma, please. Trauma is if a person is traumatized, it's the effect on a person. The event, you may call it, it's inhuman, it's illegal, it's a criminal, call it whatever. But if you call it traumatic, you mean that everybody is going to be traumatized from that. And there is no evidence for that at all by anything. I mean, it's actually negating the whole of psychology and psychotherapy. So let's follow what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that these severe forms of collective adversity, it's like I like pictorial things. It's like a big dark cloud that descends on us. And the effect it has on all implicated parties, not on them, but all of us, that those we want to help them and the whole society. The effect is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. It floods us because of the enormity of the situation, the complexity, the losses, the vulnerability, the destructiveness, the damage. And this big dark cloud has what I call a lethal cocktail of emotionally charged experiences with pressing needs. Come on, we need to do something now. We need to do something now. Do something now. On the one hand, there is that pressure. On the other hand, there are emotionally charged experiences, and the effect is overwhelming. The effect is overwhelming. Yet, as human beings, we have an unrelenting need to understand and to grasp things. We cannot say I'm overwhelmed and I don't understand anything. Oh yes, we have wonderful theories about that. Listen to the theories that Guterres had. These people are damaged because of their trauma and anger. And because we, under these conditions of being overwhelmed, we try to understand something, inevitably our understanding is oversimplified and polarized and lacks complexity. And yes, this is what I'm saying, that is the effect of this situation. Never mind whether they are traumatized or not. This is something that all of us suffer from. And the most primitive form of oversimplification is polarization. Where the good is, there the bad is. Very simple, very simple. No complexity. And then we have variations of all of that. The refugees are good, but the migrants are bad. Then either the refugees are either vulnerable or dangerous, or they are either resilient or traumatized, which is utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. People can be resilient in certain contexts and traumatized in other contexts. Why are people either this or that? Our field is split into two. One group of people say, my approach is strengths-based, and another group of people is saying, my approach is trauma-informed. And I'm working with good friends and colleagues, and they talk completely polarized language. One belongs to a category of strengths-based, another belongs to a category of trauma-informed. The field itself is split in a highly polarized way, exactly as I was saying. And then ultimately it comes to us. Ultimately it comes to us. We see ourselves either as omnipotent, we can do everything, or as impotent, we can do nothing. Highly polarized. How am I going to change the system? It's useless, etc., etc. Or no, of course I am going to change everything, etc., etc. So the key argument that I'm advancing now is that an overlooked casualty of the severe forms of collective adversity for all implicated parties, not only those who are suffering, but also for us who are trying to help them and for the whole society, is that we lose complexity. We lose complexity due to the nature of the severe forms of collective adversities, because on the one hand are very concrete and they have overwhelming impact, and because of the lethal cocktail that I'm repeating again of pressing needs with emotionally charged experiences. And what is the effect? The effect is that our capacity to process events and experiences becomes diminished. That's all we can say. Our capacity to process events and experiences becomes diminished. In psychotherapy, we have a good expression. We have no space to think. We have no space to think. We have no space to reflect. And what I call it is like we resort to impulsive conceptualization, or what I call also epistemological acting out. Epistemological acting out. We need to get some sense that we understand things, and in an acting out, we begin to formulate allegedly ideas that that grasp the totality. But these are oversimplified and polarized. In effect, we distort reality. Because if you oversimplify and polarize and you don't have complexity, we distort reality. And if we distort reality, how can we do effective planning and acting? Are we aware of this? Never mind whether these people are damaged for life. We are damaged for life because of our discourses. I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to skip this and I'm going to move on. Okay, I'll mention it very quickly. Basically, what I'm saying is that the usual way of understanding trauma is in a causal reductive way, and we know Jung is very much against that, which simply means adversity causes the effects and reactions and symptoms, etc. But of course, it's not that. I mean, it's mediated by the meaning that we give to these adversities. And this, what I call meaning attribution processes, maps, the factors that affect the way that we experience adversity, all of us know them, but we can tend to forget them. These are personal factors, our personal characteristics, our coping mechanisms, our relational support systems, age, race, disability, the motives that led to the adversity, specific circumstances, the set meaning systems. The set meaning systems. Some people are religious. Some people have this ideology or that ideology. They experience their adversity through that ideology. That's obvious. Any social scientist will tell you that. And yet we forget, and they say, because of the war, they are traumatized. Utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. And of course, time. Of course, time. Time matters. When are you speaking to them? At what time? Immediately after, or when? One of the loss of complexities, everybody's talking about PTSD, is the idea of time. Everybody immediately after some painful event, they say everybody's suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But actually, if you look at the criteria, it reminds us that you cannot diagnose PTSD unless the symptoms persist for at least 1 month. And with delayed reaction, 6 months, which strictly speaking means you need to wait and see, has that person, been behaving in that way, exhibiting those symptoms for 6 months, and then you can diagnose PTSD. Today, after a shooting event or something happens, everybody suffers from PTSD. And please, this is not politicians and journalists who say that. These are serious professionals who are saying that. And it's very obvious here. So what is going on? Pause, ask the question, why good people fall into such simplistic traps? We need to make a big distinction between distress and disorder. Distress is normal response to abnormal circumstances. And Jung comes to our support here. Jung says very clearly, suffering is not an illness. Jung says very clearly, suffering is not an illness. Suffering is not an illness. It is the normal counterpole of happiness. Do we understand that? No. With the first suffering, everybody's traumatized. And they are traumatized forever, and they are lost forever. Disorder is when this distress continues longer than the appropriate time, context, and impact. Which means, and I really mean it, if within, I don't know, immediately after a situation, a person even exhibits psychotic symptoms, it's appropriate response to abnormal circumstances. We're human beings. We're reacting. the question is, do they stay, these responses, longer? And their impact disturbs our lives wider. That is why, over the years, I developed this, what I call adversity grid, in order to tabulate and remind us as a framework of at least 3 categories of responses and consequences when we're exposed to adversity, not only for individuals, but for families, organizations, community, etc. And to begin with, yes, we do need to focus on the negative consequences. People are screaming from pain. As I say, the trauma narrative screeches. We need to listen to that. The negative responses are real. However, please, complexity, because we need to remember that as a result of these situations, we are liable to lose complexity. So we need to restore complexity. And restoring complexity means that we don't say everything negative is negative, but we need to develop complexity and at least have at least 3 levels of severity of the negative. And here comes Jung. Suffering, yes, is the least severe in terms of, disorder, form of negative consequence of being exposed to adversity. So here is suffering, here is distress, and here is disorder. Please tell me what course you went to about trauma that makes this distinction. And it is logical, and it is basic. It is basic, because is all suffering a disorder? Please. Jung says suffering is normal. Suffering is not an illness. But a disorder, a psychiatric disorder, yes, is dysfunctionality, severe dysfunctionality. All of them are negative, but there is a difference in terms of severity. And if we don't make that difference, we cannot even begin to help in this situation. Now, in addition to these negative ones, there are the unchanged. We don't have time, and I'm just going to focus only on the positive unchanged rather than the negative unchanged. And this is what I call resilience. Because in addition to the trauma hype, now everybody's talking resilience, and nobody knows what trauma means. Nobody knows what resilience. And I have a very clear operational definition. Resilience are the positive strengths that we retain from before being exposed to adversity. In other words, if I cared for my children before being exposed to adversity, and I still care for my children after being exposed to adversity, that function, not me, that function is resilient. And then, of course, we have positive consequences of being exposed to adversity. In all cultures, in all religions, there are variations of the saying, whatever does not kill you strengthens you. That is a fact. That is a fact. And always, yes, you heard properly what I said, always in every situation is not either or. That's simplistic, that's polarization. Complexity means we need to look at the negative consequences, we need to look at the unchanged consequences, and we need to look at the positive changes. And there are positive changes everywhere, even with the person who is suffering from most severe form of PTSD. It's up to us to look at that. So when we're looking at the individuals, here we can say that psychiatric disorder is the most severe form. Here would be psychological symptoms, and here is what I call ordinary human suffering. What Jung says, suffering is not an illness. It's not pleasant. When your grandmother dies, you feel distressed and you feel suffering, but you are not going to develop a PTSD. Well, you may. It depends on your relationship with your mother. And and here is the pyramid. Remember, again, the mental health psychosocial support pyramid. The majority of people experience ordinary human suffering, and only few people experience psychiatric disorders. Right. Listen to what Jung is saying. By the transcendence of life, I mean those experiences of the initiate who takes part in a sacred rite which reveals to him the perpetual continuation of life through transformation and renewal. My argument, ladies and gentlemen and friends, is that actually these situations that people glibly and easily call traumatic, in a sense, all of them, all of these situations are opportunities for transcendence because they fit in within this Jungian definition. People are shaken to the core of their beings. People are shaken to the core of their being from this situation. Their whole life is coming upside down. And therefore, there is a possibility for complete destruction and complete reconstruction and transcendence. And especially if we call ourselves Jungians and we want to take things seriously and honor the unique contribution of Jung, please let us not descend into the nonsense of the trauma, and see the transcendent possibilities of this situation and try to take that very seriously, almost in a sacred way. This is a long, but I'm going to, I'm coming to the end. I'm coming to the end slowly. Please bear with me. I haven't had my whole hour, and I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to be less than a whole hour. But listen to you. Jung says, therefore, the principal aim of psychotherapy is not to transport the patient to an impossible state of happiness, which the majority of trauma therapies are really aiming to do. I see that some people are joining now. I don't know whether they're going to hear from me now, but anyway. Therefore, the principal aim of psychotherapy is not to transport the patient to an impossible state of happiness, but to help him acquire a steadfastness and philosophic patience in face of suffering. Life demands for its completion and fulfillment a balance between joy and sorrow. We don't have time to go too much, but when people are talking about well-being today, Aristotle made a distinction between hedonic well-being and eudaimonic well-being. We don't need to wait for only Western psychologists to tell us things. There's been civilization in this kind, on this planet well before that. The well-being, according to Aristotle, is either hedonic or eudaimonic. Hedonic is the avoidance of suffering, is happiness. Stop suffering. Please stop suffering because I cannot bear it. That's not helpful to anybody. The eudaimonic well-being, according to Aristotle, is actually to find some meaning in our suffering and fulfill the aim of our lives, which is very close to exactly what Jung was talking about, individuation. We don't need Western psychologists to learn about individuation. Let's look at the roots of our civilization and of our thinking. But because suffering is positively disagreeable, yes, it's not pleasant. People naturally prefer not to ponder how much fear and sorrow fall to the lot of man. So they speak soothingly about progress and the greatest possible happiness, forgetting that, listen to this, forgetting that happiness is itself poisoned if the measure of suffering has not been fulfilled. In other words, Jung is saying to us, if there is no suffering, your happiness is going to be poison. It's going to be superficial. It's going to be robotic. It's not going to be human. If we're saying that we're Jungians, let's really try to take seriously what some of these insights Jung has given us. But of course, Jung has done a lot of other things. You know, for example, he tends to psychologize everything in terms of respecting social realities. You know, he has a big conflict between personal and collective. Everything collective for him is negative. So the idea that people in these sort of situations can benefit from being together, it's not supposedly Jungian. But I'm very pleased that your organization is called Theasos. And Theasos is not individuation. It's when people are getting together and what they create together. That is what Theasos is the togetherness, is the positive collective. When it's you, and there is, I'm afraid, my friends, there is nothing positive in anything Jungian in relation to collective. And we need to stand up for that. And when Jung is talking about the psyche, and said, is the psyche the totality of an individual? And is everything inner is psyche? What about you know, all the other things that Jung himself is saying? The moral, the political, the aesthetic, the religious, etc. Jung was talking about the total transformation, and we don't have time unless somebody wants to discuss that. He used the term metania 4 times, and he doesn't actually define it properly. But metania means change of nous, not only of the intellectual capabilities, but the whole way of understanding our reality. And we should not forget that adversity stretches people and activates new ways of responding that can be used and developed further. And in a sense, it develops new epistemology, a new metania, a change of nous, a transformed nous, a transcended nous, to reconceptualize everything. That is what we hear, ladies and gentlemen, and my friends. When we work in the field, you talk with people. If you talk to them about their trauma, they will tell you about their trauma and nothing else. But if you create space, every single person will say to you things like this: because I came so close to death, doctor, now I see life different. I wonder whether I should waste my life working so hard or spending more. I want to spend more time with my family. I want to admire my grandchildren. I want to do more things that I enjoy, etc., etc., etc. People are transformed. We're not there to cure them because they are lost forever. They are not lost forever. They underwent tremendous life changes, and we're there to facilitate for them to notice them, appreciate them, and use them. But if we do not notice them ourselves, and we're there only to repair them as if they are damaged cars, and we're there to fix them, then we miss the whole thing. And then on top of that, we say we're psychotherapists and we're Jungians. So that's why I say that adversity survivors, in effect, are philosophers, because they ask existential questions. And they say, all of a sudden, I became a grown-up. They say, why me? And they ask, what is the nature of life and death? Why people are so cruel? Why there is so much injustice in the world? They ask these things. Now, you and I are not preachers. We're not going to tell them what to think, but we need to validate that is a mark of human dignity to ask these questions. So when people are exposed to severe forms of collective adversity, they are shaken, and they, as they say, either they lose or find God. People are, I keep saying, They are shaken to the core of their beings. And ultimately, what I'm saying is that there are two languages of intervention. One is of repair and damage. In other words, following the car mechanics, we're there to fix them because they are damaged and they are lost forever, and we're going to cure their trauma. Or, which is easily comprehensible and follows the medical model or the specialist fixing computers and fixing cars, and it fits the organizational systems of care systems, and rewards vulnerability. Or the other language is what I call transformational potentiality, which it seems that it's incomprehensible, but it restores human dignity and it enables potential transformation. This is what I wanted to tell you. I am finishing with two photographs that I took some years ago in Greece, when these people were coming from Turkey, refugees, and this is the coast of Turkey, and they just arrived on a boat. They were very wet, their clothes. The humanitarian organizations gave them dry clothes. They put their dry clothes and then they left. And then I noticed this here. You know what this is? This is a makeup brush. I don't know what that means. I don't know what story there is, but there is a human story behind that. Some young woman or young man or whatever, or possibly not that young, I don't know, felt that, you know, they just arrived in their new place and they wanted to really transform themselves to face the new life. And I would like us to realize the transformational potentialities of these situations and not to just simply sink under the whole burden of trauma and trauma and trauma. This is what I wanted to say, my friends. And here we are. I'm going to stop now to discuss things with you. Thank you for listening to me. And thank you for bearing with me. I know that I'm not, you know, I can talk very intensively because I am Mediterranean, but sorry, I cannot change things. So here I am, you have to suffer me. So here I am. Tell me.
Renos, excepcional, excepcional. Muito obrigado pela uma verdadeira reviravolta. Eu imagino que alguns conceitos que para nós sempre foram pensados como conceitos standard, modelos inquestionáveis, enfim, muita coisa para a gente poder pensar. Bom, vamos lá, gente. Seguindo o velho modelo do teatro, quem quiser fazer pergunta, coloca o nome no chat, eu pergunto, eu chamo e a pessoa faz. Renos, vou tomar a liberdade de fazer a primeira.
Right. Yeah, it's late at night in London. Okay, so here I am. I really would like to hear from as many of you as possible.
Sem problemas.
And
então vamos lá, Renos, queria fazer a primeira. Você usou uma expressão muito curiosa, chamada indústria humanitária. A gente poderia falar, então, que a indústria humanitária acabou por produzir um novo objeto de consumo, ou seja, os refugiados. Há um novo mercado, o capitalismo produziu um novo objeto de consumo, os refugiados, dos quais nós, profissionais da área da saúde, somos agora os detentores desse mercado. A gente pode pensar isso?
Absolutely. I have actually written a lot about the commodification. Trauma and refugees have become commodities that are traded. I'm afraid, Marcus, we do not own it. We are pawns. The big money is not with us. There is a lot of money in the humanitarian industry. Some people have said, and I'm not a financial person, I am hopeless about finances, but that the humanitarian industry, in terms of its growth, it has the highest growth and constant growth since 1990, phenomenally more than any other industry in this world. The money that is spent in the humanitarian industry is phenomenal. And my question is, where is it spent? And on the basis of what frameworks and theories? Unfortunately, these faulty theories that I call faulty. Now, I've been part of that for 40 years. I mean, I've been working with the United Nations as, in the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, I was the chief UN psychosocial advisor there. The approach to the United Nations was based on my adversity grid. So I've been part of that industry for many years. But I try to retain some integrity, and I try to influence it as much as I can. And I have a lot of influence. I mean, the guidelines for a lot of these things, I've written a lot of guidelines, for example, for the United Nations International Organization for Migration, etc. But essentially, the trauma discourse is so powerful because it's so simplistic, and that wins everything. But yes, there is an industry, and trauma and refugees and traumatized people and trauma industry is a commodity, and it's traded very highly, very, very highly. Very highly. I mean, just look how many humanitarian organizations are around.
Mas Renos, quem lucra? Quem lucra com esses commodities?
All the organizations that claim to help people. As a society, as human beings, we are compassionate and we want to care for people. And then people use this politics of pity. Look at all these advertisements of miserable women crying and helpless children and all of that. And you and I pay money, and the sums that are collected are phenomenal. Phenomenal. If you can think of, I mean, you go into one emergency situation. There is no emergency situation with less than a dozen organizations. And before you blink, it becomes 40 organizations. And all of them will come there with their vehicles, with their drivers, with their, with their interpreters, with their equipment. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Do the suffering people benefit most from that? I think that from the budget of the industry, the actual benefit for the people may be less than 1%. The rest is just here and there. Why? Because of our own guilt. Because we cannot bear people suffering. It's the same thing. It's the same thing that we do. The ball of our child in the garden rolls into the street, and a car goes over it and it's broken. And then the child is crying. What do? Please don't cry. I will buy you another ball, bigger, better. Please don't cry. We cannot bear his crying. We don't help people to live with suffering or with losses. We cannot bear it. We want to stop them because we cannot bear it. Don't worry. No, that was a bad ball. I'll buy you a bigger ball, a better ball, a wonderful. That was a rubbish ball. We don't say yes. Actually, it's a pity. That was a good ball. Yeah, we may be able to buy another one, but yes, How many of us do that? How many systems in our society have to help us make meaning of our suffering? All agencies of society are to stop the suffering. Please stop it. I'm going back to Aristotle, the hedonic well-being, not the eudaimonic well-being. These are very serious things. Very serious things. And all of us fall into, please, I want to make a very, very clear point. I am saying all of these things. I'm not saying that I'm the clever and all the other people are stupid. I'm saying that tomorrow I will also have to fight with the same tendencies. These are tendencies that are inherent in the nature of that big dark cloud. So I am saying that to you in order to convince myself after all these years to remember tomorrow when I'm working with people in South Turkey, when I'm working in Serbia with the shooting, when I'm working in Ukraine, when I'm working in Sudan and all of that, to remember not to fall into that, because all of us tend to fall into that. So we need each other to strengthen in each other, not to fall into that. I am not here to tell you that I am the best and everybody else is stupid. I'm talking about a tendency. That's why I said for all implicated parties, not for those who suffer. All of us are subjected to these forces, to these primitive archetypal situations. This is an archetypal situation of stopping the, Jung said it very clearly. Stop, seeing suffering as illness and wanting to stop it. That Guterres is trying to do from the beginning. And immediately after something happens in every country, there is some disaster somewhere, on the government, on television, don't worry, we send mental health professionals to help them. To help them do what? To help them stop suffering with some mambo jumbo techniques.
Terrivelmente assustador. Patrícia, Maria, por favor, vamos.
Yes.
Bom, isso tudo posto.
We need each other to carry on.
Meu Deus.
Bom, boa tarde. Pode falar?
Pode, Patrícia, por favor.
Renos, não tenho palavras para agradecer a tua fala. O que você propõe é uma escuta revolucionária, né? Assim, estou me sentindo bastante mobilizada. E mais do que uma pergunta, eu queria compartilhar com você uma imagem que ficou para mim de como o nosso olhar é arrogante e de nós analistas também. Fiquei me perguntando se eu não sou tão arrogante quanto o Guterres, quando eu olho para essas crianças, quando eu olho para essas cenas pela TV, e também fico comovida e rapidamente sou convidada a olhar para essas pessoas como vítimas. Então, eu fiquei pensando nessa imagem do colonizador do sofrimento, como se nós fôssemos os colonizadores do sofrimento e eles os colonizados, né? Então, queria te agradecer muito essa imagem, se você, né, se é um pouco por aí, né, e talvez até na própria clínica, né, se cada vez que um paciente chega, se a gente também não olha com esse olhar de colonizador. Então, queria te agradecer imensamente e te dizer que eu fico saio daqui com essa imagem de colonizador e colonizados. Obrigada.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patricia. Very good image, very appropriate image, very appropriate image. Yes, there is a lot of colonialism in this. A lot of colonialism. That we go there with Western theories of trauma and try to educate people, etc., etc. I can go on and on and on, giving you examples, concrete examples. You're absolutely right, yes.
Obrigado, Pati. Luciana, por favor. Pessoal, quem quiser fazer pergunta, bota o nome, tá?
Super obrigada, Renos. Palestra incrível, sensacional, cheia de pensamentos profundos. Eu faço parte de um outro grupo que se chama Coletivo As Teses, que há um tempo atrás fez uma roda de conversa também sobre os refugiados aqui no Brasil. E eu estava reassistindo esse vídeo antes de entrar aqui hoje, e eu queria voltar um pouquinho, né, pensando um pouco nos refugiados aqui no Brasil, e pensando um pouco nisso que você trouxe sobre as vítimas de guerra, a identificação com a vítima, a vulnerabilidade, tentando distinguir muito esses aspectos. Eu fiquei com uma dúvida. Me parece que a vulnerabilidade é diferente da identificação com a vítima. E as pessoas que chegam, né, que tiveram que largar a pátria, a mãe, para vir para algum lugar onde precisam de acolhimento, eu acredito que estão num estado de vulnerabilidade, no sentido que chegam com uma linguagem que não conhecem, com códigos que não conhecem, muitas vezes se isolam em si, porque não conseguem se socializar, não conseguem se adaptar aos trabalhos, as crianças não se adaptam à escola justamente por causa da língua, o preconceito que sofrem, né? Nessa roda de conversa tinha muito exemplo de preconceito, de pessoas pretas, por exemplo, com preconceito com os mais pretos, que eram os haitianos, né? Então, eu queria te ouvir um pouquinho mais sobre isso.
Yes. Thank you, Luciana. Very, very good point. Very good question. If we remember that these situations create a lack of complexity, we need to immediately try to think how we can restore complexity. And when we're talking about vulnerability, what you said is absolutely right, but we need to add something else and not just stay with that. Yes, these people are vulnerable because of all the reasons that you mentioned. They don't know the language, they don't know the culture, all these things you said. They feel completely disoriented. They don't have the predictability of the lifestyle that they had before, etc., etc. But at the same time, so we should not, that's why I'm saying, let's go back to the adversity grid. You identified vulnerability. I'll come to the identity. Immediately, we need to say, what strengths do they still have? Because they may not be able to do this and that and that and that, but what can they still do? And in most of the situations that I work, I try to identify some strengths. And if a person is almost psychotic, even if they can help sweep the kitchen once a month for 2 hours, that's good for them because it connects with another part of them that they are capable of doing something. So we need to use their existing strengths, whatever this there. And if we begin to look for that column, we will find that they can do much more than just simply sweeping the kitchen. So we don't say that, yes, they are vulnerable, but in addition, they have some strengths. And the question is, what strengths are these? Do they see them? Usually not. Usually not. Why? Because the system is such that if they come to see you and me, they will talk about their problems. They're not going to talk about their strengths. But what are they doing? Then they are basically amputating themselves. They see themselves and they relate to us only with their damaged part, not with their strengths. Jung was warning us very repeatedly using the Latin expression pars pro toto. That is the logical error of taking one part as if it is the whole. Yes, vulnerability is one part of a human being, but it's not the whole human being. So in order to see the whole, we need to see human beings three-dimensionally, stereoscopically, not as caricatures of trauma. So we see in what way they have been damaged, we see what strengths they have, and also we see in what way that experience has strengthened them. And we see in what way that experience has enabled beginnings of transformation for them to begin to ask existential questions about themselves. When you lose the familiar surroundings and the familiar activities of every day, you question a lot of things. Do I need to still do that? Is that useful? Is that not useful? Can I live without it? Can I live with something different? These are existential questions about who I am, what am I doing, what is my life about? I've heard endless times. Before the war, I was wasting my time. After I was put in jail and after I was tortured and after this and that, now I try to see and see, I say to myself, what am I going to do with my life? I'm alive and I value life. I don't want to waste it like I was wasting it before. So that vulnerability, first of all, needs to be put in the context of the three-dimensionality of human beings, which is vulnerability, existing strengths, and new strengths. Then, if a person is treated by you and me only as a vulnerable person, which pays them off. In most countries, the more vulnerable you are, the more benefits you get. In this country, if you get a psychiatric diagnosis of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, virtually you secure that you get asylum in this country. So vulnerability is rewarded. So if in their interactions with people, they emphasize their vulnerability, we know from any, a person doesn't need a PhD in psychology to realize that then that identity, that part of them becomes increasingly more their own identity. So we start from some vulnerability, and then before you realize, their whole identity is that of a victim. And then once they see that actually how it pays to be a victim, they even consciously try to play that role. I worked with people in many parts of the world who say, I do not want to collect any benefits. And they said, I do not want to prostitute myself because I'm still a strong human being. I worked all my life. I don't want to collect benefit. Now, I'm helping them to sort of say, look, if there is benefit, let's get that, and still you can use. So, there is complexity there. But usually there isn't any complexity. So when I'm asked to, because in this country, nobody can officially, for legal purposes, only clinical psychologists and psychiatrists can diagnose post-traumatic stress disorder. Part of the work that I've been doing over the years is to write reports for the courts for people who apply for asylum, okay? And if I don't lie, but if I say to them, look, in this report, they're not interested whether you are a good pianist or whether you write poetry or whether you care for your elderly mother. They are interested in your vulnerability. So this report, so I educate them about the image of vulnerability that I am writing in their report. So I tell them for this report, this is what is needed to emphasize. I'm not lying. This is true. But we're not going to tell them other things that, because people cannot understand it. And they are going to get confused. And they'll say, if he's so strong and he can write poetry and he can do this with that, why should we give him a benefit? No, give him benefit because he's entitled to, and also help him to be a human being and transform human being. And there is complexity. But the majority of people, because everybody now works with refugees, everybody wants to help, and their level of understanding and complexity becomes less and less and less. Because they think that helping is just simply giving them benefits and nothing else. I mean, this is what Guterres wants, to give them support and money and support them for the rest of their lives because they are damaged. Is that proper psychological transformation? So what you asked is very important. By the way, my book on involuntary dislocation has been published already in Ukrainian and in Italian, and is about to be published in Greek and in Arabic. Maybe some Portuguese publisher may be interested in publishing it also, where I put these things in much more complex way and much more coherent way and systematically. All of these things, yeah.
Obrigada, muito obrigada.
Obrigado, Lu. Martinha, por favor, contigo.
Primeiro, muito obrigada aí pela palestra, que é maravilhosa mesmo, instigante. E assim, eu fiquei pensando, você falou sobre refugiados, né? E eu fiquei pensando também se isso, que me parece que isso não se aplica a exilados, né? Porque aqui, por exemplo, no Brasil, na década de 70, com o golpe militar que teve aqui, né? Muitas pessoas se exilaram, foram exiladas, então não sei se caberia nesse deslocamento involuntário ou voluntário, né? Porque aí eu estava pensando assim, qual seria a diferença disso, né? Quer dizer, o tratamento para exilados ou para refugiados, né? Quer dizer, onde é que os refugiados ficam mais vítimas, né? Então, queria um pouquinho se você falasse disso.
Thank you, Marta. Another good question. Look, there are many varieties: refugees, migrants, exiles, people who have been tortured, people who have been trafficked, etc., etc. If you look at my book, I try to bypass all of that and create one general term: involuntarily dislocated persons. All of them involuntarily had to abandon the spaces that they consider homes, not only their physical homes, but sometimes their spiritual homes or their cultural homes, or their linguistic homes, or their narrative homes, where they are connected with histories, etc., etc., in order to go to another place in order to survive. So there is a lot of complexity there. Now, I use the term, and the first chapter, I think, a couple of chapters in my book to begin with, are dealing with the very terminology, because as I've shown to you, if we are not very careful about the words, and Jung is saying that also, words carry us in certain directions. So we need to be more conscious of the words that we're using in this situation. I am using the word involuntary dislocation to refer to the, in order to problematize the human agency. Involuntary means that they did, if they had a choice, they would have not wanted to leave. But it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody put a gun in their head. But if they felt it was not possible to carry on living with dignity as they wanted, then they had to leave. Now, yes, I mean, I've worked all over the years in all sorts of different, with all of these groups of people in different contexts. It's not something that I can immediately say that with this you do this and you do that, and with that group you do the other. But it's just being mindful of the complexity of their own experience, and for us to try to immerse ourselves in the uniqueness of not only the exile experience versus the refugee, but anybody's experience. That's why I showed you that photograph. I don't know if you were there when I showed you the photograph of people finally arriving in the safe land. If you speak to people, everybody will have a different experience of arriving safely in Europe. And if each person will not have only one feeling, but a mixture of feelings, and each person will not be clear about their mixture of feelings. So there is complexity and complexity and complexity. Any attempt to try to say all refugees feel like this, all exiled people feel like this, is really difficult. I have that with journalists all the time. You're a professor, you have worked for so many years, you're a director of the center, etc., United Nations consultant. Tell us, what will they be feeling now? I said, I didn't speak to them. They get mad. No, I didn't speak to them. I don't know. I mean, some of them will feel this, some of them will. But what do you think? I mean, you studied this phenomena. No, I work with people. There are different people. Depends on their background. It depends on their psychological types. It's on their strengths, their weaknesses, their ideologies they follow. It millions of things. So what I'm saying is that it is useful for us to ask about different groups of people, but it's even more useful to ask for each individual person. Does that mean then that we don't have any idea? Yes, we have ideas about overall trends. And we have our ideas about how to construct our dialogue with them. And actually what we should have ideas is not that, but the factors that are likely to obstruct us to construct a proper dialogue. Because we'll go there with our recipes and our Western ideas of saving them, and etc., etc., etc. With my trainees, and I offer this training. Yeah, by the way, some of you may be interested in doing the course. I mean, I offer courses in masters in refugee care and PhDs in refugee care at the University of Essex, which is less than 1 year. If you are interested, ask me. And in these sort of situations, with with refugees, we need to focus on what is the complexity with everybody, and what are the tendencies that prevent us from encountering people in the right context.
Obrigada.
Yeah, thank you also. There are a lot of other things I can say, but you know, yeah.
Obrigado, Martinha. Renos, temos mais uma pergunta. Vamos lá. Beatriz, Bia, tudo bem? Beatriz Vidigal. Tá aí, Bia?
Tá me ouvindo agora?
Sim, sim. Tudo bom?
Então, muito obrigada por esse espaço. Eu vou fazer uma pergunta tão pequena e singela diante de um tema desse tamanho, né? Mas também aproveito a oportunidade para dizer a maneira como me impactou, professora. Assim, eu chamo essa uma aula de ética, acima de tudo, porque a leitura, o olhar, a atitude que atravessa cada comentário seu é um chacoalho sobre que leva a gente a fazer questionamentos éticos, quer dizer, como eu me movo, como eu me sinto, onde eu me coloco em relação ao outro, até o que evocou em uma das pessoas a falar nessa questão do papel do colonizador, eu acho que representa a mesma coisa que eu senti, né? Isso é de uma grandeza, é uma fonte de conhecimento, assim, que, na verdade, é para ir lá dentro e voltar em formato de atitude, né? Não é nada intelectual só, ele é de mexer com a gente, assim, fazendo a gente se questionar sobre pequenas atitudes do dia a dia, né? E isso me fez pensar em uma situação micro, não na situação social coletiva enorme, como os refugiados, mas assim, uma atitude que a gente leva anos se treinando para ter diante de um paciente, por exemplo, a atitude clínica do analista, e como isso deve reverter nas nossas atitudes cotidianas também, e às vezes não revertem, estou falando num plano bem pequeno da observação pessoal mesmo. Então, por exemplo, somos treinados a olhar para os nossos pacientes não como alguém que está fazendo uma demanda, que é porque a gente tem empatia, a gente vai atender. Não, pelo contrário, a gente aguenta a dor do paciente e a gente espera oferecer para ele, se for possível, um jeito de aprender a conviver com a dor dele, que ele conviva, que ele entenda, a gente não dá solução, a gente não, nossa, né? Não é porque tem empatia que quer resolver o problema dele. E isso, às vezes as pessoas dizem que a gente é frio com isso, e eu sinto que não se trata de frieza, é de alteridade mesmo, né? É o lugar de vê-lo assim, de acreditar que convivendo com a dor dele, ele vai crescer e viver melhor. Nesse plano miúdo, a gente acho que tem um consenso, os analistas diriam, eu também faço isso, também, né? A gente se treina para isso. Quando você passa para o cotidiano da vida, é como se isso fosse uma atitude de analista que você não vai ter com o seu irmão, com seus parentes, com seu, né? A cumplicidade, como dizer, a empatia vira cumplicidade. E há um deslize, um convite cotidiano para a gente não ser tão ético assim. Não sei se você me entende, é muito pequeno o lugar que eu estou querendo pegar, mas o seu exemplo do menino que está jogando uma bola na sala e que estoura é ótimo para dizer que é no pequeno que a gente percebe, né? Então, quem é o pai que não compra uma bola de borracha baratinha de novo, em vez de deixá-lo chorando? Mas como aprender a fazer uso dessa grande lição que você está trazendo numa dimensão mega para as pequenas situações do dia, para que a gente aprenda a recolher, a descobrir sentido nos pequenos sofrimentos, porque só daí eu acho que a gente vai ampliar nas situações macro. É isso.
Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you. Thank you. I'm really enjoying every question. Each question is fantastic. What I said is not only about refugees. It's about people who experience severe forms of collective adversity. But not only that, also with ordinary mini adversities of every day. So what you are saying is absolutely right. The framework is the same. How do we, in general, how do we counteract bad practices? First, by becoming aware that there is a tendency for them to take place. If we're not aware that there is a tendency for them to take place, and if I think that I am above that, and I'm not going to because I have a PhD and I finished this institute and that institute, and I'm trained and I'm a trainer and this and that. If I have that kind of attitude, I will not pick it up. But if I am aware that actually these are human situations, that all of us are subjected to this tendency, then I try to find signs in me how I am not doing it right, how I am falling into these traps of these collective ways of trying to avoid suffering. Once I am aware of that, believe me, each one of you, with your own resources, with your own background, with your own creativity, you will find a way of dealing with that. The best recipe to begin with is for us to have appropriate humility. Not humility because you belong to this religion or that group and all of that, and you are supposed to be humble, but because of the reality of the situation, that actually these are very powerful situations, and look how they tend to overwhelm us, and how are we going to retain our humanity and understand the complexity of the situation. When we're working with people in front of us, however difficult they may be, in whatever difficult situations they may be, with my trainees, I say to them, just ask that question of yourself. If you were in their shoes, if you were in their situation, and you went through all those adversities that they went through, would you have survived? The majority of people, if they are really honest, they would say, no, I wouldn't survive. Then what happens? Then immediately you see their strengths. So instead of seeing, so you begin then to have complexity, and you don't see the person only just as a traumatized person and nothing else, but also you see their strengths as well as their trauma. And that is complexity. And if you were to ask, I have these sort of simple tips. Ask yourself, if I were in their situation, would I have survived what they have survived? 99% of the situation, you would say, no, I don't think that I would have survived. Then immediately you see their strengths, and then find an appropriate therapeutic way to convey that. Not to sort of say crudely, oh, I can see you're very strong and all of that. We're therapists, we're not politicians, hopefully. And then the second tip, if you were to ask them the question, you went through this war or whatever, this earthquake. If somebody was saying to you, I don't know, I'm working in Turkey now, with the earthquake. 3 months ago, before the earthquake, if somebody told you that in 3 months' time, you would have lost half of your family, all your properties, your job, and everything, would you have thought that you are going to survive it? 99% of people say, I never thought that I would survive it. What does that mean? That they are realizing the strength that has been generated as a result of being exposed to this adversity. This is what I call adversity activated development. Development that was activated, that was energized because they were exposed to adversity. And then you have a full human being in front of you. Once you have a full human being in front of you, then you can work in a normal way. But if you see them only pars pro toto, as Jung says, only one part of them, only their damaged part, in relating through that only, you are distorting them, you are distorting yourself. And of course, all of us love the word holistic, holistic, holistic. And we don't practice holistic because we focus only on their trauma and nothing else. So if you do these very simple tips that I developed after many years in this field, you will see the complexity of the person in front of you, and you'll see the full human being. And once you see the full human being, you'll see the suffering human being, and you see the greatness of that human being in front of you. Even if that human being was repeatedly raped and tortured and trafficked and all of that, you will see their beauty. You see their humanity. You will see their strength. And then you can begin to work. If you are sitting there and you think that you're the expert and you have all the techniques and you are going to fix that person, I would say, please go back and watch television, because you are not going to do any service to that person. But in that sense, I am a minority. But so what? I carry on and I enjoy it.
Obrigado, Bia. Renos, estamos chegando no fim do nosso prazerosíssimo encontro, apesar do tema ser um tema árduo e espinhoso. Queria te deixar uma última pergunta. E aí eu quero fazer uma pergunta para o Renos, cidadão do mundo, alguém que tem uma experiência em diversos países, diversas realidades, contextos culturais diferentes. Renos, o mundo está caótico. A gente está no meio de uma guerra da Rússia e da Ucrânia. A gente tem a extrema-direita presente na Europa, como tivemos aqui no Brasil. Os discursos xenofóbicos estão vigentes. Nós estamos no meio de um colapso ambiental, aquecimento global da temperatura, ressecamento dos terrenos, o que vai provocar que as correntes migratórias e os deslocamentos involuntários aconteçam cada vez mais. Eu te pergunto, e aí, meu amigo? E aí? O que a gente faz?
You remember the polarization, omnipotence or impotence? Both are extremes. We need to, you and I cannot change the world. If you want to, you're welcome. I tried a lot in the 60s. I've done my bit. I gave up. But I found new ways. You know, what I'm doing is very meaningful. If we can have a meaningful connection with 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 people, then we feel that we're done as much as we can. That doesn't mean that we are feeling great and euphoric. No, we're still very disturbed by all of these things that you said, and many, many more, and many, many more. The polarization in this world, the mindlessness, the brute force, the brute exploitation, and all of these sort of things. But as long as nobody controls my mind with a remote chip, when I am sitting in front of somebody, I try to use my humanity. I try to activate their humanity, and I try to be humbly grateful by their smile, that they will say, thank you, you changed my life. And there are many people like that. And that makes our life meaningful. In addition to all the pain that we have for all the reasons that you mentioned. But if we, I don't belong to political parties, although I vote and I have political views and all of that. But, you know, I don't believe that one political party will solve the world or whatever. When I told you that I was teaching at the University of Cape Town for 10 years during apartheid. Actually, my wife was in prison. We were against apartheid and all of that. I worked with Mandela during the period when he left the prison and before he became a president. If we had 10 Mandelas in this world, then probably the world would be better. But unfortunately, Mandela was unique, and I hope there will be more Mandelas. But that is at that global level. At the ordinary level is what I said. We need to help each other. We need to support each other because yes, the world is crazy and the world is brutal and the world is mindless. And we need to support each other to retain our humanity and the human dignity and help each other. And that's wonderful. I mean, look at this wonderful feeling that we were able to generate this evening. I'm so grateful to you. Thank you.
Renos, queria te agradecer no meu nome, da Luciana, da Isa. Eu acho que esse encontro de hoje é um encontro, como a Bia falou, ele é ético, ele traz o resgate de palavras que às vezes nós corremos o risco de nos afastarmos. Humanidade, dignidade, aceitação do sofrimento. Então, a tua fala ela vem como uma espécie de boa nova. E acho que ela nos mantém numa espécie de alerta para nos lembrarmos do que é feita a matéria-prima do nosso trabalho, né? De não esquecermos que a matéria-prima do nosso trabalho é o sofrimento, é suportar. Nós não fazemos parte da indústria humanitária, nós não fazemos parte da cultura do trauma, e que bom que você está aí para nos lembrar disso. Muito obrigado. Renos, e queria me permitir fazer a última pergunta. Você realmente acredita que a cidade do Cabo é mais bonita que o Rio de Janeiro?
We said 50-50.
Tá bom. Aceito. Queria te agradecer, Renos, por favor. Queria te agradecer pela tua generosidade. Espero que a gente possa nos revermos em breve. Se você quiser dizer alguma coisa para finalizar, fique à vontade.
I am overwhelmed by, we talked about overwhelmingness in a negative way. I'm overwhelmed by the wonderful spirit that we were able to create in a couple of hours. There it is. That's that's a proof that we can all do things. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm very, very grateful to you for this opportunity you offered me to interact with you. Thank you.
Um grande abraço, meu amigo. Um grande abraço. Espero que a gente possa se encontrar presencialmente para a gente poder conversar mais. Tudo de bom para você.
E vamos lutar para a publicação do seu livro aqui. Pronto.
Boa, Bia. Vamos trabalhar para conseguir uma editora para publicar o seu livro. Tenha certeza, deixa com a gente. Tá bom? Pessoal, prazer enorme receber vocês aqui. Acho que a gente teve um daqueles momentos muito especiais do Tiaços. Espero que todos se sintam compartilhados com a mesma emoção que eu tive. Muito obrigado. Bom final de semana. Lu, quando é que a gente volta?
16 de junho, com Benjamin Sells, no Cosmos, Beleza e Cidade, reflexões a partir das ideias de James Hillman.
Bom fim de semana, pessoal. Renos, um abraço. Até lá.